This doesn't feel right anymore. I think it's time for an upgrade. That's better. Greetings and salutations, people of the internet. Austin here. Welcome back to the new and improved Amalop region. The first region on this channel so far with the original and rebooted version showcased. Before we get to that, first things first. Y'all crushed it with the last video, and I cannot thank you enough for that. As of writing this script, we hit and just blew past 200 subscribers for the channel, baby. Woo! Y'all, I don't have the words. I couldn't have done this without y'all, so from the bottom of my cynical heart, thank you. Sincerely. Alright, enough of the mushy stuff. Let's get you up to speed on what's been happening in the Amalog region since we've been away. The ever-reliable Professor Ipe has called you back to help stop the rapid destruction of the region due to the new evil team on the block, Team Glamour. Their leader, Sephora, the head of a major pharmaceutical and makeup company, is clearing entire swaths in the region in pursuit of a legendary Pokemon who is said to be able to reverse the aging process. You are tasked with stopping the actions of Team Glamour before they can uncover this mysterious legendary or destroy the region in the process. Their actions have actually unearthed some new Pokemon hidden deep within the region, and some seemingly appearing out of thin air. Let's revisit some old friends and meet the new faces as I go over the rebooted Amalop region. Feeleaf, the Aroma Cat Pokemon. The first thing I did with the redesign was simplify the pattern on the body to what you see now. A pattern that will remain constant throughout this entire evolutionary line. I also made the colors more vibrant. No, I don't care if it makes the comparison with Sprigatito even more evident. I swapped out the pink for yellow for the eyes and flowers, and then slightly tweaked the proportions all around. This design changed the least out of the base starters, mainly because it was the best already. Now, unlike the first time around with this region, this is not my starter pick. Panbush, the berry lure Pokemon. Off the gate, I shrank the torso so this Pokemon wouldn't be so long for a middle stage. I cut down on the number of berries on the bushes, but made them bigger to compensate for that fact, so they read easier. Colors are still more vibrant compared to the original, and I squared the face off just a little bit more. Not much more to say, the design really didn't need to change all that much. Leopard, the Bush Stalker Pokemon. I drastically altered the color scheme of this Pokemon, cutting back on the brown and the secondary greens. I also simplified the face pattern so it reads easier at a first glance. Changed the shape language of the bushes to feel sharper, and I cut down on the number of Lepa berries growing on them as to not overclutter the design. I made the claws red to bring in a splash of color on the lower body and to even out the red across the design. Good update, but not the best compared to the others. Pyrodillo, the Fire Shell Pokemon. I mainly made the head and legs bigger this time around so it felt more proportional. I also simplified the shell since it was a tad over-designed for a base stage starter. Defined the snout shape a bit more since the original really didn't have that strong of a silhouette. This time around, I chose this Pokemon as my starter. You'll see why when you see the final evolutions redesign. Cyferno, the Esperclaw Pokemon. This changed the most out of the middle stages as I replaced the yellow with black as to not overcomplicate the color scheme. I went with a Typhlosion type flame on the back there to keep things nice and neat. The pink had to get upped in saturation since it was way too muted in the original. But the biggest change was making this Pokemon chonkier with thicker legs to compensate. God, it hurts looking at the original in comparison. Something that only gets worse with the evolution. Armaheat, the Cannonball Pokemon. Biggest glow up of the region. This is a night and day difference and has skyrocketed up my starter tier list. I removed the yellow from the design and replaced it with the black like in the previous stage, and I made it more of a 3/4 view, alongside making the central pink a bit darker, but the flames were easily the highlight of the redesign. I went with a purple flame made of pure psychic power. The color balance was the thing that took the longest to nail down, constantly swapping back and forth between different colors. But it was more than worth it in the end. Oh, this was such an easy lock-in for my rebooted game team. Aquana, the marine lizard Pokemon. A complete redesign from the utter failure of the original. These Pokemon take themselves very seriously and train all day and night. I don't even know where to start with this redesign. I took the bare bones skeleton of the original and streamlined it into what you see now. The colors pop more, the personality shines through easier, and this design doesn't make me want to die. It's an all-around improvement. A Gwombat, the Iron Blow Pokemon. This changed the least out of the middle stages, though that's debatable when looking at Panbush. I drastically shrank the legs and made the head bigger so it felt more balanced. I simplified the color schemes so it didn't look like it was wearing clothes as much. There's still a little bit of that in there if I'm being honest. I also changed the pose for a more interesting one. Again, that one is debatable. And like most of the region, I made the colors more vibrant. Ramtidal, the Ocean Splitter Pokemon. I did what I said I needed to do in the original breakdown and brought back the red for this design, and I am so glad I did. Koraidon was the biggest help in redoing the proportions of this design. Thank you, Mighty Sandwich Lizard. I made this Pokemon more top-heavy to play into the punching power and to help break things up proportion-wise. I had the underbelly flow into the pants this thing has, and added a splash of green to the tail for some color balancing and to break up the colors. Not as drastic a glow-up that Armaheat got, but a still much-needed one. Cappy Baby, the social rat Pokemon. First thing out the gate was giving this mon some actual color and Pokemon-like features. I added a lot more blue to the design to draw in the eye, and I gave it some wavy patterns along the back to break up the body. The little buck teeth add a lot to the design for me personally. I don't have a whole lot of notes for the redesign here. This is a solid update for what is still just kind of a meh mon overall to me. Slumbara, the sleeping giant Pokemon. Like the previous stage, adding more blue to the design was the name of the game here. I made the Pokemon thicker than a Snicker, giving the platform on the back more presence, for lack of a better word off the top of my head here. I also think the tiny water whiskers are a fun touch. Still not my favorite Route 1 normal type, but it is significantly better than what it was. Mimic, the imposter bug Pokemon. Decided to put the Caterpie mimicry front and center here in the design, plus it makes for a more interesting pose. I made the tail bigger to fill the role of mimicking Caterpie better, alongside the addition of more yellow to the underbelly. The colors got touched up, and the front legs became slightly bigger overall. Piccoon, the false rat Pokemon. The new expression makes me kind of uncomfortable, but I appreciate the fact it makes me feel anything at all, so I'll take it. I tried to make the body feel more cocoon-like, so the limbs are more connected to the body, and I moved the tail to the back for a better silhouette and effective mimicry. Mothster, the Dragon Wing Pokemon. This one changed the most out of this line, that still being my favorite Route 1 bug type to this day. I removed the mouth to better resemble the Atlas Moth, for which this mon and most of the line is based off of. I darkened the fur to stand out more. I replaced the arms and feet with more classically bug type appendages. The only thing I would fix now is the left wing's perspective, as that wasn't something I noticed was wrong until after I had posted it and someone had pointed it out to me. This is still a fantastic Pokemon in my eyes. Hotzini, the Rotten Eater Pokemon. Route 1 bird hasn't changed much in the reboot. I mainly gave it more of a neck. I removed the yellow to simplify the color scheme. And most of all, I brought the wings down to a place that actually makes sense. The design thankfully didn't need to change that much, so I don't have much to talk about here. Hotsick, the food poisoning Pokemon. Here, I mainly fixed some perspective issues with the crest on top of the head, recolored the toxic gas coming from the mouth, and added the claws back to give it some more Pokemon-like elements. It's slightly more of a 3/4 view, but not as much as I could have done. Toxic Fumes was a fun signature hidden ability for this line, to give it something special of its own. Hoatzeal, the Toxic Fowl Pokemon. I removed the green from the design since the color scheme was just too busy and I couldn't get it to look good, so I limited it to just the gas mustache. Added the claws here to make it feel more deadly and give it another avenue to spread toxic gas from. I gave it some more toes and added more colors on the lower body to help this Pokemon from being too top-heavy color-wise. Top 5 regional birds now for sure. Slowvine, the Hanging Vine Pokemon. The line work and proportions were the only thing that really needed fixing with this design. I made the legs thicker to support its weight and make it less of a green noodle boy. I moved some colors around here and there on the face to make certain things pop. Solid render all around. Treery, the Bark Armor Pokemon. The pose change was the most needed thing with this redesign. The old one was just too plain to bring back. I added more green to the design to break up the colors and add some contrast. I think the tired dad vibes ring even truer with this redesign, even if it's not as popular on DeviantArt as I thought it would be. At least the render turned out nicely. Arapuni, the Tiny Missile Pokemon. Not a whole lot to say here. I just gave it a minor pose change and made the underbelly/tail a darker blue for contrast. What I can say is this is a much stronger shiny color scheme compared to the original one. This and the evolution did not need to change too much, just refine what was there already. Arapyro, the Steam Jet Pokemon. The colors were the only thing that really needed to change here, and even then, it didn't change all too much. Added more yellow to the front half of the body with the fins, and broke up the red and blue in the back half in a much cleaner way. Outside of making the scales bigger and simplifying the tail fin, nothing else really changed. Great Pokemon overall. Boiling Point is from my Grease Space region you'll be seeing down the line probably next year. Amalopian Pachirisu, the Ellis Squirrel Pokemon. Moved this guy up in the reboot since it was way too far into the original for a Pika clone to show up. I gave it a slight pose change and massively changed the colors around here to feel cohesive. This is mainly with the lower body and the tail, the latter receiving the most changes out of the entire design. I made the cheeks blue to stand out against the fiery color scheme of the rest of the design. From the worst regional variant of the Amalop region to somewhere in the middle now. Pyroclaw, the Nest Invader Pokemon. Messed with some of the proportions here and there, mainly with the head and the back legs. Simplified the patterns a lot by removing a lot of the mud spray across the body, and made each segment a little bit bigger to compensate. As I said during the Zinnia breakdown, I completely forgot about Pyroclaw when I did the abilities of this mon. So that's a fun little goof that I'm just going to keep as is. Regent, the Iron Queen Pokemon. The first brand new Pokemon and cross-gen evolution of the reboot. This is the evolved form of female Durant once they defeat 3 Alpha Durants in battle. This is based around Bullet Ants and Iron Maidens. This one took forever to lock down into this design. I almost gave up on it multiple times. The stinger can open up and have prey be thrown into the massive spikes that lie within. I love the crown and the little blade wings this Pokemon have. I just think they're fun design details. The color scheme took way too long to iron out. Pun intended. Shadowpin, the Shadow Snake Pokemon. I beefed up the size of the head and I brought the body closer together to feel like the weight was more distributed evenly. Besides that and making it a little bit thicker, nothing else changed with this design. Buuna, the Shifting Snake Pokemon. I can sum up the changes I made to this Pokemon in one sentence. I simplified the ectoplasm sections. That's it. This Pokemon was already perfect in my eyes, so I didn't need to change it all that much. The ectoplasm sections of the face now clearly stand out when compared to the original. While this Pokemon has barely changed, the next ones are drastic. Guineaton, the Rock Burrow Pokemon. Complete redesigns for this entire line was an absolute necessity as they were trash. I stood the Pokemon up, gave it a completely new color scheme, and I removed the rock sections from the body and gave it an actual personality. This is a complete and total upgrade from the original in every single way possible. The only thing I would change now is going back to make the shiny better. Rock Cappy, the Mountain Carver Pokemon. I cut down on the rock armor to the absolute minimum to create a nice synergy for this design without covering the entire thing in rocks. The new orange and black color scheme really pops now against the earthy color of the rock armor. Thankfully, this has a much more interesting shiny than its Prevo did. Pakalana, the Wool Hiker Pokemon. The next new Pokemon line added to the region. These are based on alpacas and llamas, Peruvian clothing, and mountain hikers. I love this entire line. I am so mad with myself I didn't make an Alpacamon in the first draft of this region. I think this is super cute, very fluffy, ties well into the custom hidden ability. Sheer Escape, outside of being a fun pun, was my way of giving this Mon a chance in battle despite its horrible defensive typing. The shiny slaps, that's all. Yalama, the Wool Hiker Pokemon. The color scheme was the thing that took the longest to narrow down, as all intricate color schemes do. I really love the addition of the red. It really pops against the rest of the colors, and the wool poncho was a fun way to play around with that. This is a solid addition to the region. Amalop and Joltik, the Falling Stone Pokemon. Removing and simplifying the rock texture and shapes were the name of the game with this line, and I think they're stronger for it. I wanted this Pokemon to look sturdy and heavy, but not bogged down by too much detail. I gave it more of an expression that reads clearly, and I made the colors a bit more distinct from one another. This is still a regional variant that I think is solid, but it's not my favorite by any means. Amalop and Galvantula, the Stone Spider Pokemon. Everything I said about Joltik applies double for this Pokemon, as I had hell smoothing this thing out. The purple rocks in the thorax were the biggest pain in the ass with this design, but thankfully now they're at least partially 3D looking. Color-wise, I darkened the black and the orange, and I made the purple slightly brighter. All in all, a good update. Decibird, the Whistlebeak Pokemon. The first new sound type added to the region, this walking siren is based on bellbirds, the loudest bird on the planet, as well as high-frequency whistles. This little ball of screaming is a solid addition to the region, but not my best. The whistle waddle is a fun design element, but outside of that, this design isn't anything special, but for a first stage, it isn't awful by any means. Blairwing, the Flute Beat Pokemon. Evolved from Decibird once exposed to a Sky Stone, this now incorporates pan flutes into the design. Overall, it's pretty solid compared to Decibird, but I also discovered during the process of designing this Mon, and looking back on the Texcan region, I love giving my fake Mon ponchos. I don't know why, I just do. Anyway, I really love the shiny for this Pokemon. The red color in particular, I think it looks really nice on it. Amperin, the Shawcaller Pokemon. The proportions changed a lot with this redesign as I slimmed up the torso, made the arms much longer, and I spread the legs out so it felt a little bit more balanced. I also made the head bigger and I swapped out the gray skin for the medium blue you see now. Since this Pokemon is based on very, very loud monkeys, I gave it Harmonized to give it some sound type stab options while still keeping the pre-existing typing. Synapsian, the EMP Pokemon. This boy got some hefty changes in the reboot, mainly with the color department and changes made to the lower body. I separated the top and bottom halves of the Pokemon to make each one more distinct color-wise and to balance out the overall color scheme. I made the tail bigger at the end to give it some weight and to help with the balancing issues. I made the black darker to make the other colors pop more, and I broke up the silhouette more on average, mainly in the head region. I am much happier with this design overall. Ice-Skeeto, the Frozen Sting Pokemon. Of the Food Web trio, this one changed the second least. I massively shrunk the thorax and I filled it with not blood, totally not blood, and made said thorax partially transparent. I made the front pair of legs into tiny little sickles, fixed the wings, and added some icicles growing off of the nose. This is my personal favorite of the redesigned trio, but I do think the others have more complete designs. Carapoeta, the acrobatic bat Pokemon. I gave our Kiki boy here a full-on bandana. I made the gi more freighted at the edges to break up the silhouette and to make the colors a little bit more saturated. This one changed the least out of the trio, only streamlining the pre-existing design. Epex, the large talon Pokemon. This one changed the most out of the trio. I tried to give it more of a regal look with the pseudo-crown and beard. Thankfully, this has lessened my issue with the original design essentially just being a cartoon harpy eagle. There is still some of that issue here, but I can at least call this a Pokemon proper, even if it's not the best one. Elaplant, the root tusk Pokemon. Minor proportion changes were the biggest update with this little cutie. I made the ears, trunk, tail, and toes bigger to varying degrees, while making the central green more eye-catching. Timber is an ability I created in my Canada region, basically acting as the special attack version of Moxie. I definitely prefer the shade of blue on the new shiny versus the original one. Plant Synth, the seed spray Pokemon. First thing I did was make the trunk bigger and the ears more detailed to help flow easier into the final evolution. On that same train of thought, I added the new dirty orange to the design to replace the light brown of the original design. The new color pops more and still sells the idea of a grass brown type. There's some minor tweaks along the rest of the body to help it stand out more otherwise. Pachyderm, the shovel tusk Pokemon. The biggest change was made to the tusks, making them more like trowels/shovels to play into their design motif and role in the region, while still keeping the orange present to stand out. The leaf poncho was made larger and spikier to draw in the eye, and just be more visually interesting. I made the trunk and tail a different color to help them stand out and not blend into the body as much. I wish I had kept this Pokemon on my team, but a new grass-type Pokemon added to the region took its place. This is still one of my favorites. Ortis, the Metal Turtle Pokemon. Our tiny metal boy here got some pretty significant updates, so let's list them out. He got bigger legs, I changed the shape of the shell, and I added an hourglass mark to it. Brought the head out, made the eyes bigger, and I made the beak a different color. The hourglass motif will make more sense with the evolution. All in all, good updates to what was an overall mid-Pokemon at the time. Torsteel, the Iron Shell Pokemon. One of the oldest Pokemon in the region, it was time the design reflected this factoid. The fact it's so old is where the hourglass on Ortis comes into play. Someone suggested I make the metal coating this Pokemon rusted over to show its age, and that was the best piece of advice I could have gotten with this design. I added the pseudo beard to the design to show off its old man status, and to give it a little bit more grit with the jagged edges along the stomach and neck. I unintentionally reused the pose from Torfero, but it works so well I can't bring myself to care. I brought back Fight or Flight from the Sendine region to give this Pokemon a little bit of an edge competitively. Currants, the Electro Hive Pokemon. Funny story with this one. This redesign was actually based on an early pass of the original design I couldn't get to look right. Someone suggested I put them in a circle to reference ant/death circles, a phenomenon that ants can get into based on pheromone trails, and a closed circuit. As for the actual redesign, I shortened the leg and antenna of each individual ant, I made their eyes bigger, and I changed the electricity trapped in the thorax. This is definitely an improvement over the original design. Amalop and Klefki, the Skeleton Key Pokemon. I made the central color a lot darker to help stand out against the rest of the palette. I made the ectoplasm behind the design more saturated and uniform shape-wise so it was easier to read. I made the bone keys more misshapen and detailed to sell the fact they were whittled to look like what they do. Lastly, I added black to the face to help make the face pop more and add some contrast. I still really love this regional variant. Chrysopup, the gardener dog Pokemon. This little guy hasn't changed that much comparatively. I mainly just made the head to body ratio a little bit more even. I made it a little bit fluffier, and I added the berry juice along the muzzle for the cute factor and to add in another color. Vegetarian was created because of the main wolf's diet of mainly fruits, and I thought that would be a fun ability/immunity for this line. Chrysobird, the Firehound Pokemon. Evolves via Firestone now. This got some serious updates in the reboot. I added the dark blue from Grimmsnarl and placed in most of the yellow since I thought it clashed nicely with the red, and it wasn't as much of an eyesore. I gave the head more of a 3/4 view, kept the increased fluffiness from the previous stage. I made the legs more defined, and I made the tail a little bit longer. Throw on the orange tips on the mane and tail, and this pupper was good to go. Percussai, the monkey drum Pokemon. Based on squirrel monkeys and monkey drums, this is one of the many sound types I added to the region and is probably the cutest of the bunch. They use their unique tails to play happy tunes to uplift people's moods and drive back predators if enough of them are together. The vague musical note bang on the head is probably my favorite detail in the Pokemon. I added the red to the design since a lot of monkey drums are painted red. This is one of the simpler but better additions to the region. Uproar, the Bellowing Cry Pokemon. Boy, oh boy, did this Pokemon need an update badly. Off the gate, I gave it a more streamlined body plan and bigger legs to support its weight and make it feel a bit more powerful. I made the eyes bigger, gave it more of a snout, and combined the whiskers into 2 big ones for simplicity. I added the spot on the chest to help transition into the evolution and to give it a bit more flair design-wise. Terror, the River Tyrant Pokemon. I made this Pokemon less of a noodle proportion-wise, mainly just giving it more of a neck and bringing the head up. I thickened up the Pokemon in general, but mainly with the legs and tail. Added the white to stand out against the dark blue body plan and make it look like well-aged battle scars. I removed the black from the design since it wasn't doing too much for it and just added red in its place. Now I am actually happy with this line. K-Mad, the Snapjaw Pokemon. Outside of better line work and textures, the only thing I really changed with this design was giving it a more defined orange pupil. That's it. I didn't think this Pokemon's design really needed to change at all. It was kind of perfect in my eyes already, only needing small touch-ups. Kydraco, the Thrashing Fight Pokemon. I made it a sound type because of the complex vocalizations that crocodilians use to communicate with their young, and I thought this Pokemon needed a little something extra to make it special. Design-wise, the basic design is still more or less the same, but the proportions needed major work. I made it more hunched over to feel primal and powerful. I changed the leg and foot shape to give it more stability, and I made the arms a touch smaller and brought them down on the torso. I also cut down on the number of stripes across the body to try and avoid clutter. Now, this Pokemon is a worthy rival to Terror. Magispirit, the Spirit Pincer Pokemon. The evolved form of Kingler once exposed to an ectostone while knowing Guillotine. Points for the most asinine evolution of the region goes to... Anyway, this is based on Japanese spider crabs and dead monarchs. This is one of the first few evolutions I created for the region since I had an image of a guillotine crab in my mind. This design went through so many rough drafts. For the longest time, I tried to turn the body into an actual guillotine, but it just didn't work. So I had the pincers function as that lore-wise. This isn't the best new evolution added to the region, but I am glad I added it. Sidecheck, the Esper hatchling Pokemon. A damn near complete redesign. I only kept the absolute essentials from the original design for this Pokemon. I changed the main color to be more interesting and to sell the psychic type easier. I changed the head to body ratio proportions and straightened out the leg to better support the weight. Biggest change of all was giving it the psychedelic trip for eyes and to play in their new lore having trouble controlling their ESP. Mental block with my attempt to making a mixed bag hidden ability, as it can absolutely be a detriment to the Pokemon or come in clutch. Flamindo, the Filter Beak Pokemon. Another sizable redesign. I tried to beat the Just a Flamingo allegations the original design rightly had. I kept the single line from the previous stage to make it more interesting. It now stands on a water bubble held together with ESP as a constant training exercise. I added these psychedelic colors from the Prevo into the color scheme here to be more eye-catching and to keep that general theming going. This still isn't a great Pokemon, but it's no longer a trash Pokemon. Crinspector, the Toxic Test Pokemon. So I added this Pokemon to finally pay off the tease I made in the original Dex entry for Sidechick in the first draft of the region. This krill/brine shrimp Pokemon is their main food source, adding some much needed food chain action in the region. Aside from the animal basis, this mon is designed around hazmat suits and toxicity tests, something that brine shrimp are actually used for. So the tail and antenna are now a meter to measure the toxicity of the water they live in. Combined with Toxic Boost, these guys are the perfect water purification test for the region. But due to the toxins they absorb, they make Sidechick's ESP visions even worse when eaten. A fun addition to the region. Toxeel, the Poison Body Pokemon. Not many changes were needed for this Pokemon, so I'll speed run said changes. Made the body smaller, the head and tail bigger. I made the black a shade darker so the others pop more. I cut down the number of spots on the body. And lastly, I made the eyes bigger and more expressive. A simple but much needed update. System Shock was a hidden ability I created for the Pika clone in my Canada region that shares the typing, so I thought it fit here. Conduxio, the Shocking Toxic Pokemon. This has even less changes than the Prevo, mainly just darkening the colors and simplifying the pattern on the body. Oh, and a touch of eyeliner doesn't hurt either, so it has a more visually distinct eye. This Pokemon might not have had many changes, but it's still stuck around on my in-game team. Amalop and Carvanha, the Controlled Rage Pokemon. Barely any changes were made to this Pokemon, mainly just removing the visible teeth and some minor proportion changes. Not a whole lot to say here. This Pokemon is basically untouched outside of an update render. Omnivora, the Spiritomb Pokemon. Second verse, same as the first. The only major changes were made to the fins up front and the one underneath. The head is also slightly more 3D here, but not by much. This line was kind of perfect, so nothing really needed to change. I will say, I think the shinies are slightly better. Slammerhead, the Frozen Fist Pokemon. My boy, my favorite Pokemon, the foundation of my in-game team. They've got some minor updates, mainly in the render of the Ice Fist and some slight perspective changes in the face. I also made the underbelly white for better contrast against the now darker red. The body is a bit more streamlined, but not by much. This Pokemon was never going to leave my team. Temgwin, the Regulator Pokemon. Three-quarter view was all that was really necessary for this Pokemon going into the reboot, so that was the first thing I did. I changed up the face pattern and the overall color scheme. I made the stomach into a thermometer, so the more red on the stomach, the hotter the Pokemon is getting. Freezer Burn is an evil little ability I gave this Pokemon, so it has something of its own. It's a fun one. Woolor, the fake sheep Pokemon. The first convergent species added to the region. This is based on wolves and sheep's clothing and wolf spiders. Naturally, I had to make this a Wooloo convergent for the perfect execution of this admittingly stupid pun. Honestly, I think this is probably the most successful conversion of the region by a long shot, even if I really do love the other one, we'll see towards the end. My favorite detail are the braids being the pedipalps here. Dubweb, the fake sheep Pokemon. I turned Dubwool upside down for the evolution here. The massive horns now being their fangs, the legs being quills to ward off predators, and the face pattern turning into the mouth. This is the most insane convergent design I've ever done thus far, and I love how it turned out. Juvenile, the hyperactive Pokemon. I added this Pokemon for a few reasons. One, I needed more electric types. Two, this line felt incomplete, so this is one of the few times I will happily add a baby form to an old Pokemon. This tiny ball of feathers and energy is very cute, even if the design isn't anything to write home about. I basically took Ramzapdos and toned it down. I'm glad I added this Pokemon despite the passive-aggressive comments I made about it in this breakdown. Ramzapdos, the burned-out Pokemon. This Pokemon really just needed a redraw to reach its max potential. I did add more color to the feathers on the wings and the tail to help the color balance, and I gave it a few more toes for its actual balance. There's my bad joke of the video. You're welcome. This is a solid update all around for this Pokemon. Karaprime, the gang bird Pokemon. Yet another bird added in the reboot. This is based on the crested Karakara and gang members. When I learned about the Karakara's tendency to steal anything not nailed down, I knew I had another dark type on my hands. This one's pretty simple, all things considered. The gold chain pattern around the neck being the most complex thing about this design. The shiny is easily in the top 10 of this region. No question. Knifeturnal, the dagger Pokemon. Another mon that didn't need to change all that much in the reboot. This has very few tweaks added to the design. I mainly added the closed eye to the design since it felt weird it didn't have one there initially. Yes, this Pokemon would be on Zoro's team if they had Pokemon in One Piece. Other than that, I made it slightly slimmer and I made the blue-gray color a little bit brighter. Batana, the Swift Slice Pokemon. This Pokemon now evolves via Skystone and got a huge update compared to the Prevo, so let's break it down. I added an edge to the wings to help them look sharper thanks to a suggestion I got on Discord. I changed the guard/collar to look more like an ornate katana. Added more color to the face with the eyebrows and pseudo eyes, since this thing is still blind. I just want to fill you in on that. I gave it some armor along the top of the wings and added the gold band around the bottom of the body to give the impression of a sheath. Oh, and I just made the gold brighter in general. I'm really happy how this update turned out. Stitchghoul, the Soul Owl Pokemon. Oh hey! Yet another new bird! Jokes aside, this is the last new bird introduced in the reboot. Technically. Anyway, this is based on the Stygian Owl, so I had to make it a ghost flying type, because, you know, Stygian, River Styx, you get it. Regardless, this is one of my favorite ghost types, period. The ectoplasm feathers and horns took a minute to get right, but I'm glad I went in that direction. Combined with the skull pattern on the chest and the bright red eyes, which is a reference to Stygian Owl's eyes turning red with certain filters, or like lighting, I guess I should say. This Pokemon immediately makes its presence known. Amalop and Cacnea, the cactus Pokemon. In terms of changes, I made our lava cactus boy here taller and slimmer overall. I swapped out the off-green color with a nice gray, and I removed the black from the inside of the body and replaced it with orange. Felt that gave it a little bit more nice contrast. I also added more yellow to the design for color balancing. That's also a little bit of a texture going on there. Other than that, not much to say, except I love that shiny so much. Amalop and Cacturne, the Burning Spike Pokemon. Biggest change was removing the awkward cactus hands from the original version of this design and turning them more into cannons. I kept the gray from the previous stage and I added a row of spikes along each arm and flattened the top of the head for reasons that'll become more evident with the form change. All in all, a good update to this form, but the real quality comes with the Inferno form. I went full volcano with this form. The arms and hat spewing lava constantly and billowing smoke. The colors got darker, the spikes are now burning bright and ready to be shot off like a flaming missile. This is my favorite render of the reboot. Not my favorite design, render. Mentera, the Tunnel System Pokemon. Our plucky noodle here got some moderate changes, but is still more or less the same. I made the body smaller so the proportions felt more like a first stage. I removed the eyes to help the line feel more cohesive, and I gave him some big old chompers for consistency. The colors and patterns are pretty much the same, and it's still a very strong design. Binhorn, the Trenchwork Pokemon. Body is now decently smaller, better to fit in the role of a middle stage, and the dirt covering the face, neck piece, and tail are now sand colored for some contrast. That's pretty much the full extent of the major changes. Stuff like better line work and texture I really won't bother saying, since that's the case with basically all of my redesigns, unless the texture was particularly good. Swamminho, the Bogworm Pokemon. Much like the rest of the line, this barely needs to change at all, only needing minor touch-ups. I made the tail and neck spikes more distinct using the sand color from the last stage. I made the neck piece more 3D, added some spots here and there to break up the colors, and simplified the little spike leg things this thing uses to move around. Swampland was created to be a more annoying arena trap with the constant speed reduction, and to give this Pokemon a very niche use. This is also the newest member of my endgame team. Magmol, the Pyroclaw Pokemon. Not even gonna lie, this is essentially just a redraw of the original, with the only major difference is that I removed the flame and replaced it with a little tuft of hair. Nothing else in the design is changed enough to really talk about. But what I can talk about is the hidden ability and the new stage hazard. This is basically the fire-type equivalent of toxic debris. The only difference being it spreads hot coals on the battlefield. It will burn any non-fire types on contact, making it a good alternative for Will-O-Wisp for doubles matches. Clava, the Magma Arm Pokemon. Now this got a redesign. Biggest change out the gate was getting rid of the god-awful pattern the original had for something more streamlined and clean. I extended the cooled magma sections of the upper body by a bit, so it covered more and made for an easier transition to the lower body. I changed the shape of the nose from erupting lava to a simple flame, and I squared off the head to look like a volcano. The render on the arms got the biggest upgrade thanks to finally learning how to render lava, thanks to the Rodan line from the Vanek region. This and Amalop and Cacturne would be versions exclusives if y'all were curious. Shottentail, the Steel Bunny Pokemon. Alright, we're about to get a bunch of new Pokemon in this upcoming section. First off, we have Shottentail here, based on little bunnies and steel wool. I initially wasn't going to make this Mon and have its evolution be a single stage, but someone suggested the name and I had to make this Mon. I wanted this Pokemon to be a giant puffball with super hard fur and a hole taken out of the ear by a hunter. At least visually, anyway. This thing does have arms, FYI. They're just hidden by the massive floof. Crosshair, the Carrot Sniper Pokemon. Y'all know me well enough at this point. Yes, I did make this Pokemon just to use the name. So glad you noticed! The Carrot Sniper was the first thing with this Pokemon. Thankfully, it was pretty easy, all things considered, to get down. The crosshair pattern on the ear covering the eye like a laser scope a la Deadshot from DC. Mwah, perfect. The vague sniper bullet pattern on the arms and legs and the fur around the face and neck acting like a bandana, this all creates a perfect storm of design elements for what amounts to a stupid joke that I can't help but love. Sand Shield, the Arbor Mouse Pokemon. Fun fact, this was the first Pokemon I drew for this region while I was working on something else at the time. Anyway, this spiky boy here is the evolved form of Sandslash once it defeats 3 dragon types in battle and is based on pangolins and fairy armadillos. I wanted this Pokemon to be a defensive powerhouse and to give Sandslash the love and power it really needs to be better. I will admit, I wish I made the head more of a 3/4 view, but I really do love this Pokemon. The dark blue against the rest of the earthy tones just does it for me. The massive fuck-off claws combined with a giant mass of quills on the back screams F around and find out. Another Pokemon that almost made my team. Chatu, the Bard Pokemon. One of the OG cross-gen evolutions from the first time around, this Pokemon got some much-needed love. I made the colors a lot more vibrant to match the colors of parrots and the energy D&D bards bring to the party. I made the black sections darker and added more of them along the design for contrast and to break things up. I simplified some of the color scheme to feel more coherent, mainly with the face. I added more feathers to the legs to give it old-school leggings and poofy pants. Most importantly, I gave it a goatee. This would be the ace partner of Professor Ippei. Rakit, the River Mine Pokemon. Yet another new Pokemon in this section of the Pokedex. This is based on river stingrays, sirens, and landmines. I wanted to play around with different kind of sound types, and I thought a stingray would be fun. They bury themselves in riverbeds and unleash a loud wail when stepped on so they can escape while their would-be predator is incapacitated. I made this Pokemon fairly simple design-wise, essentially just a landmine with eyes and a little devil tail. Normally, I wouldn't care for a design this simple, but I do think it works here for what this Pokemon is. Poisiron, the Giant Stinger Pokemon. Based on giant river stingrays, the evolution here took a long time to get right. Mainly with the face and the overall perspective. I made a poison type to reference the venom that stingrays have in their tails, and I thought this would be a fun type combination to play around with. I kept the landmine aspect from the Prevo with the little hat on top of the head, acting like the top of a regular landmine. I absolutely love the shiny with this Pokemon. Top 5 of the region, easy. Daltyke, the Gentle Fin Pokemon. Besides fixing the awful line work of the original, the only major change here was to the colors. I decided to help the transition to the evolution feel more natural, and I made it pink as well. Plus, it just looks cuter this way. A slight pose change with the fins, and this Pokemon was finished. Still a mid Pokemon, just one with a better render. Botomance, the Phantom Suitor Pokemon. Huge glow up. Only way to describe the redesigns for these two. Finally found a way to make the hat on the male version of this Pokemon look not completely awful. I went with more of an open suit jacket look for the male one, with the blue bow tie and the black shoes and belt coloration. You know this thing would be a milady kind of guy. Whereas with the female version, I made gold the main accent with light blue here and there. I know Amazonian pink river dolphins really don't have back fins, but it felt weird without them for these Pokemon. Insectivert, the Shy Worm Pokemon. Okay, the other main bug type of the region gave this one a completely new pose compared to the original. Kept the same basic design and personality, but I made these spikes and antenna red to stand out more. If I didn't mention it the first time around in the original video, this line is based around the Blushing Ghost Butterfly. Recluse, the introvert Pokemon. The worst bug type in the original region has been mostly salvaged with this rework. I made it more of a 3/4 view to fix the awkward posing of the original and to make it a bit more 3D. I simplified the shapes and colors of the lower body to feel more like a cohesive unit. I kept the red blush from the previous stage as a through-line design motif throughout the entire line. This Pokemon still isn't great, but I'm not embarrassed to look at it anymore. Spirifly, the Phantom Moth Pokemon. Alright, this is the big one in terms of redesigns for this line. I completely overhauled the wings so only the top and bottom portions are physically part of this Pokemon, with the rest of the wing being made up of ectoplasm that reflects whatever emotion this Pokemon is feeling. I made the blush on the wings more of a gradient since it was just awkward otherwise. I made the body slimmer and the arms and legs black and red respectively against the purple and white body. I made it a little bit sillier with the doubled over laughing pose and expression. The shiny is a bit of an eyesore, but I kinda love it. Elichick, the Lightning Beak Pokemon. Another near complete redesign. This Pokemon needed it more than most in the region. I added the eggshell around the lower body because I thought it would be pretty cute to see it run around in one and to help break things up. The head and tail feathers were done as such to break up the silhouette and draw in electricity like a lightning rod. The red and blue colors are there to reference positive and negative poles. I also switched up the head to body ratio to give it more of a unique silhouette. This plucky little shit is now ready for battle. Also, love the shiny. Rootstorm, the Weather Vane Pokemon. This one didn't change as much in comparison, mainly just fixing the bad perspective and re-rendering the electricity segments along the body. Added the red and blue from the previous stage to break up the colors and make them pop visually. Not much else to say, this is just a solid tune-up. Corvern, the Apple Core Pokemon. We got back-to-back new evolutions here. I mean, I had to give Hydrapple some friends after all. Like its many-headed cousin, this Pokemon evolves from Flapple once it learns Dragon Shear. I went with a wyvern design to make each evolution very different from one another, being based on a different type of dragon or dinosaur. I made the wings look like peeled apple skin held together with a hardened syrupy concoction. I gave it little legs, and I made the horn/stem a lot longer. This is a very simple evolution compared to the others in this line, but I am happy with how it came out. Paimon, the Apple Dragon Pokemon. Another Dragon Shear evolution. This evolved form of Appleton is based around pie throwing with some Ankylosaurus DNA thrown in there. What? I like the dinosaur, so sue me. I made this Pokemon a lot bulkier with a catapult-shaped tail, some ice cream/whipped cream-esque additions, and armor across the back and torso, and bigger legs to support the weight. I love the little drool coming from its mouth. I think it adds a lot of character to the design. Catapult is a hidden ability from my China-based region. Thought it was perfect for this Pokemon. Hydrapple is still the best of this trio in my opinion, but I am happy with the mental image of all three of them together. Condoler, the Elevation Pokemon. So, yeah, apparently I was lying earlier when I said that I was done with birds. I forgot about this line. My bad. Anyway, another new addition to the region, this line is based on the Andean condor. I wasn't going to make this mon initially, but it was a suggestion from a friend since this condor is the national bird of a good portion of South America. Since baby condors are essentially walking puffballs, I naturally had to make them as fluffy as hell. They live on high cliffs where it's very, very cold, so that's where the fur comes in. The color scheme is a bit basic for an ice type, but it does work pretty well. I maybe could have given it a bit more thought between those eyes, but maybe this thing's just an idiot. Griffrost, the Elevation Pokemon. Evolves via an ice stone. This Pokemon takes to the upper atmosphere and soars down to bombard their prey with a hail of icicles. The The ice crest on the head was the easiest decision, combined with the ice covering the top portion of the wings. It's not the most original, but it works pretty well. I added the medium blue to add that splash of color to the design and break up the color scheme and to help show the flying type just a bit. Okay, I just thought it was pretty. There, are you happy? This Pokemon is a few losses away from being moved to the Curia Preserve, but unfortunately I think one of their cousins might have beaten them there first. Keep an eye on that. Amalop and Cramorant, the Gulp Pokemon. Not much to say with this one. Only minor color alterations were really needed with this design to balance it out. I added the dark blue from the wings to the tail feathers, and I added the pink from the bib to the flippers. That's it. Everything else is more or less the same, just with a better render. Pelagulp, the Bubble Jaw Pokemon. Now evolving from Amalop and Cramorant once it used its dive 15 times in battle. This evolution got some decent changes, mostly in color as well. Added more black to the back to help balance that out, and I added a blue tip to the tail feather so that color wasn't just isolated to the wings. Throw in some red from the eyes to the inside of the flippers, and that's really most of the changes. I made the colors overall brighter, and I made the water jaw significantly darker so it feels really jam-packed full of water. Solifist, the Flipper Strike Pokemon. The head size and placement relative to the body was the only real major change it needed. Now having an actual neck area, that makes sense. Other than that, I made the red on the body more of an orangish red. Oh, I also rounded out the edge of the front flipper so the shapes were a little bit more consistent. Celior, the Beach Brawler Pokemon. Thank you, Hero Form Palafin, for being the perfect template for this redesign. I removed the back legs and turned them into a single tail that this Pokemon stands on, and massively bulked up the upper body. Man never skips arm day. I gave the face more of a 3/4 view, and I made its beard a touch bigger overall. I made the red a lot brighter, and I made the ears slightly bigger. That's about it. Now this Pokemon's ready for a fight. Aerosite, the Arrowhead Pokemon. Not even going to waste your time. This is just a redraw with a slightly better expression and overall better render and colors. Nothing else changed with this little demon. Moving on. Loricaloid, the False Jaw Pokemon. Someone suggested I give this evolution and its counterpart a cop and robbers motif since they weren't the most interesting of mons, and I was inclined to agree. So I gave this Pokemon a cop makeover, mainly giving it a police cap and the badge pattern along the side. I limited the yellow coloring to just the badges and the eye, and replaced everywhere else with a light gray that you see. The base design is more or less the same. Don't get it twisted, this Pokemon is just as much of a menace to the people of the region as its counterpart. They're just dicks in different ways. Spiriva, the Spirit Hook Pokemon. I swapped the black and white color placements from the original and made the render on the Spirit Hooks better. That's it in terms of changes. I went with this color scheme to better match the animal source material, and it looked more like a ski mask you would see a stereotypically burglar wear. These two barely changed from the original draft. Titanope, the Fruit Tree Pokemon. The evolved form of Tropius once exposed to a leaf stone. This is based on fruit trees, jungle canopies, and brachiosaurs. One of my favorite new cross-gen evolutions added to this region. This Pokemon is peak in my eyes. I wanted this Pokemon to feel huge, since Tropius always feels too small to me. So I made the neck much longer, added the tail, both having the same alternating color scheme pattern on it for color balancing issues. I increased the number of bananas on the head to really make this silhouette more interesting. I decreased the number of wings it has, but I made them significantly bigger to compensate. Added little coconuts at the end, and I think this is a really fun design for a Pokemon that really needed the love. Dark Tongue, the Toxic Tongue Pokemon. Now the proper split evolution for Krogunk, once exposed to a metal coat like it should have been the first time around. This got a lot of changes to be more in line with the rest of the family, so let's break it down. I cut the number of fingers back to 3 each and I rounded them off so that was more consistent, same with the toes for that matter. I cut down on the purple to a few select spots on the body and to not overcomplicate the color scheme. Trust me, that took a long time to narrow down. Added some bracers, for lack of a better word, to the top of the forearms, and I made the tongue more dart-shaped. Now, I am happy with this design. Amalop and Graplocked, the cheap shot Pokemon. A pose change is the only real change to this design. That and making the underbelly black opposed to the dark blue of the original. Sorry, I don't have a whole lot to say about this design. It's just the same design, just done better. I did shrink the gap between the mouth and the rest of the head, so it wasn't as awkward looking. Crustacean, the Frozen Claw Pokemon. I stretched the body out a bit so this Pokemon is a bit shorter, but wider as a result. I made the eyes purple to help them stand out against the color scheme and to help transition to the evolution easier. I changed up the position and the shape of the claw so it actually makes some sense. I completely changed the shape of the mouth and I gave it little icy eyebrows. Why? Because it's funny. Fantation, the Phantom Claw Pokemon. A big update to this mod was needed to make it actually not suck. I swapped which arm was made out of ectoplasm, greatly increased the size of said spirit appendage, and I changed the render on how it looked. So it was actually viable design-wise. Made the legs bigger as well as increasing the upper half of the body size to create a more interesting body plan. Everything else outside of the mouth is more or less the same from the original design since the color scheme really wasn't the issue in the first draft. Shiverkey, the Hugling Pokemon. Minor proportion changes and a fur collar amount to the majority of changes with this Pokemon. Yeah, there's nothing else I can really say about it. Moving on. Frosimian, the Warmth Pokemon. Second verse, same as the first. Most of the changes amount to a fur belt and the ice on the tail being more focused shape-wise. Warm and Toasty is from the next full region we'll be covering on the channel, so I will go more into detail there once we get to it. Probably in September, maybe October. Depends on how things go. Pampaka, the Pampered Rodent Pokemon. I fixed the eyes perspective, made it bigger, and I brought it down on the face so it actually looked natural. I also slightly made the skin brighter. Royal Presence is from another region down the line we'll also be discussing at another point. I felt it was a fun ability to give this Pokemon since it needed something. Mahonarch, the Arrogant Pokemon. Okay, there's actually something I can talk about with this Pokemon. Finally, this stretch can get interesting. I made the crown more 3D with some actual perspectives of the other points on the opposite side of the head. I moved the dark brown of the claws from the original version to the torso so it wasn't just an accent color. I simplified the pattern along the stomach and I moved some colors around. Said colors are more saturated. I still don't love this Pokemon, but it's a solid improvement all things around. Labrat, the Mad Genius Pokemon. One of the bigger glow-ups of the region, this Pokemon now has an actual visible personality. I brought the Pokemon down on all fours since the previous pose wasn't doing it any favors. I made the gloves and boots more apparent and replaced the light gray of the underbelly and tail with a pale green. Aside from the bush on the back getting a better render, that's pretty much it in terms of changes for this stage. I did give this line Blight as one of the abilities as I said I would. Otossum, the Chemical Thrower Pokemon. First things first, this Pokemon now has an actual neck compared to the nub of the original. I changed the legs to be more interesting and to help out the silhouette. I made the toes brown for some color balancing. Lastly, I changed the color of the poisonous gas wafting out of the plant beakers, which I also made clearer in this rework. Now, this Pokemon is a proper mad scientist. Orchin, the Stone Urchin Pokemon. The last of the OG cross-gen evolutions for this region. This Pokemon got some actual decent changes to it. I made the legs slightly smaller and curled in on themselves as it now floats in the air thanks to Levitate. I made the central spikes of the brow bigger and had them be the only ones that were orange as the primary color. I changed the eye and butt mouth colors, mainly just swapping them, and I added a lot more spikes across the body with electrified tips. The shiny got a massive buff as well, with the yellow and dark blue color scheme replacing the dull red and gray of the original. Garafist, the Bottlefoot Pokemon. Another example of a mod barely changing from the original. I can sum up the changes in one sentence. I made the horn and the eye bigger alongside just giving it a more dynamic pose and lighting. I need to do more low-angle poses and lighting. They're always so much fun when they come out correctly. Sorry if I'm clearing my throat a lot. I do not feel good when I'm recording this section. Malthagorai, the Gaping Maw Pokemon. Unlike its version-exclusive counterpart, this design actually changed a lot in the reboot. Firstly, I made it more top-heavy with a more pronounced head/eye and spiky shoulder fur. I made the legs smaller but thicker to compensate, and I made the fur covering the calves a lot spikier to feel more dangerous and break up the silhouette. But the biggest change was made to the stomach mouth. I eliminated the teeth from the previous design and made them one with the chest area, alongside just making the mouth bigger in general. A night and day difference between versions. Sacture, the Roaming Stalker Pokemon. I made the black and red of this design darker alongside adding a burlap texture over the entire design. I also made the eye slightly bigger with a visible pupil to allow for more expression. Nothing else changed there. Whistlebone, the Whistling Stalker Pokemon. No real major changes were made to the design, but a lot of minor ones added up. Firstly, I made the stitching on the bag face simplified, so it would be easier to read at a glance. I replaced the off gray with black on the bag and the hat this Pokemon is wearing, and I changed the skin tone to be a little bit more of a vibrant purple. I changed the position of the hands as I could not get the perspective right for me, no matter how many times I tried. Lastly, I changed the shape of the legs so it would feel more interesting and spooky. Wraith Whistle was purely added because of favoritism. I wanted my in-game team to be cracked, and I hadn't made a new custom hidden ability in a while, so I got that itch. This Pokemon remains on my in-game team. Rotom Buzz, the Plasma Pokemon. Since I finished up with the evolutions, I figured it was time for a new reoccurring form change across my region. So, Rotom was the most obvious pick. This concept has been done to death, I know, but I wanted to try my hand at a Bug Zapper Rotom form. I went with purple as the main color because I wanted to help it stand out against its competition, and I thought it was prettier overall. The rest of the design isn't anything special, really. Rotom Horde, the Plasma Pokemon. Fun fact, this was going to be an Electric Dragon type at one point, but Electric Dark fit it better overall. This comes into being once Rotom enters a broken drone. So, I forgot we had Rotom drones back in Galar when I was beginning to design this, so I was in for a not so pleasant surprise when I began looking for reference photos. Whoops. Still, I was intent on making this design happen, so I moved forward and I tried to make it as unique as I could compared to the existing design. So I went with a different direction. Instead of taking footage or delivering packages, this greedy little bastard steals packages like a porch pirate. It's an evil Amazon drone. That's the joke. I love the little claws up front. I think that is a fun focal point for the design, alongside the disconnected turbines on the side. All in all, a fun design. Manchosen, the Trainer Trap Pokemon. Biggest change to this Pokemon was turning the poisonous Pokeball berries into poisonous apricorns. I made the tree section taller so it would be easier for this Pokemon to hide amongst bushes. I gave it some white pupils for more personality. While not much has changed with this design, this Pokemon is responsible for a new type of Pokeball being made. Toxic Balls. They have a higher catch rate on poison-type Pokemon and wild Pokemon who are currently poisoned. Yes, this Pokemon is very annoyed it ended up helping humans. Amalopian Scolipede, the Megapede Pokemon. The final regional variant of the reboot, this is my favorite of the bunch still. As far as changes goes, I added the yellow to the color scheme in the eyes and the pattern along the side, which got simplified, FYI. I made the tail longer to act like a scorpion, and I flipped the spikes around to better serve that purpose in battle. I went with a more saturated purple for the main color since the old one was too washed out. Dragon Slayer was meant to be a fun but situational hidden ability that I could dole out to future Pokemon and not have it be too broken across the board. Finpire, the Bloodbeak Pokemon. One of the many vampire mons in my catalog, this Pokemon actually changed a fair bit from the original pass. I added more white to the chest area to help with the color balance, same reason I added it to the tail feathers. I made the head more of a 3/4 view and I gave it an actual neck, something I neglected with the original. I changed the wing shape and I brought out the back wings so it could have the standard flying type pose. This should be the last Dracula-based mon for a very long time. Stone2, the Hidden Rock Pokemon. My Rocky Derp child here got so much love. Let's talk about his makeover. I swapped out the dark gray for a Gigalith blue to make the design more interesting to look at. I gave him pronounced eyebrows and a pseudo beard because it brought some interesting shapes to the design and broke things up in the chest region. I also really embraced the head emptiness of this design and had the eyes look in different directions for maximum character design. Lastly, I made the feet a bit more complex. Swabloom, the Bushroot Pokemon. The second and last new Convergent species added to the region, this regional Swablu here is based around a potato and generic foliage. My favorite design detail has to be the root, feet, and tail. I just love that. This isn't a super complex line as a whole, but I think they are some of my best Convergent Pokemon to date. Altaroot, the fake bird Pokemon. Arguably the weakest design of the line, this reads more as a regional Altaria than a Convergent admittingly, but I do love how it turned out. The splash of colors with the flowers in the chest, plumage, and the giant leaves acting as hair, I just love it. If this was the end of the line, I would say it was a bit disappointing, but thankfully, we're not done yet. Megarbirth, the Flower Bush Pokemon. Yep, I decided to take the Mega Altaria design and make it a third evolution for this Convergent line. I love this Pokemon so much. The different flowers making each other pop against one another, the green and blue drawing in the eye against the flowery backdrop. I just love it. This has one of the prettiest shinies I think I've ever made, and I was more than happy to make this the final member of my in-game team. Scorpido, the Healing Sting Pokemon. This Pokemon is more or less the same as its original counterpart. I think the biggest change was to the tail being more consistent in the heart shape with each segment, and the syringe stinger itself being more 3D in its perspective. This Pokemon really didn't need a change at all in my eyes. Bessie Kugon, the Toxic Tide Pokemon. The last new cross-gen evolution added to the region, this evolves from Dragalge once exposed to a sludge stone. This is primarily based on kelp bubbles, a bubble-like structure filled with gas that helps keep kelp afloat. Someone brought this to my attention on Discord and I was brainstorming, and I am so glad they did because they made this design perfect. So I turned the back of this Pokemon into a kelp forest filled with poisonous gas balls to ward off any would-be predators and serve as sanctuary for any lone Skrelp. This went through more than a few passes just so this didn't feel like a rebranded Mega Evolution, but I am more than happy with this Mon. I mainly created it to continue the rivalry with Clauncher, since it may or may not have gotten an evolution prior to this reboot. Stay tuned for that. Fun fact, this is Sephora's ace Pokemon. The only one on her entire team she legitimately gives a shit about. She's had it since it was a Skrelp, picking it because it's cute in an ugly way when she was younger. Barkizard, the leaf lizard Pokemon. Most of the changes amount to proportion alterations in the legs and the head and neck area. I thickened up the legs and made the head more proportional with the rest of the body. At the suggestion of someone else, I redid the leaves into a single frill on the back and the tail spike. I added some purple to the claws since it was a little lacking in color variation. Restyle, the sleeping dragon Pokemon. The biggest change was made to the arm up front. I moved the position forwards and changed the perspective, so it actually made some modicum of sense. Because of that, we can now see the leg that was covered up prior. I simplified the pattern a bit so the stripes are more of a diamond shape and were fewer in number. I removed the blue and replaced it with the purple for consistency across the line, and I felt the blue didn't work anymore. I also changed the shape of the leaves on the elbows and tail. Solid update, nothing major. Alright, moving on to the fossils. Subzoto, the winter coat Pokemon. Most of the design is roughly the same, some minor perspective changes in the face and bigger wings for the most part. No, the biggest change was made to the personality. In order to be more in line as a whole with its evolution, I made this Pokemon a bit more shrewd and intelligent. Not by much, mind you, just enough that this Pokemon's not a complete idiot. Arcturic, the Frozen Fiend Pokemon. Again, most of the design is more or less the same, but most of the changes were made to the render itself. Before we get into that, let's get the obvious changes out of the way. I made the colors brighter, I made the legs thicker, and added an ice spike to the tip of the wings just for a little bit of impact. I brought the tail feathers up, and I made the fur collar spikier. The major change was having more sections of the body be covered or made of ice, mainly in the eyebrows and the trio of feathers along the back of the neck. A simple change, but one I think does wonders overall for the design. Skullior, the Extinction Pokemon. One of the two fossil lines of this region, this changed drastically more than its counterparts. I changed the color of the comet trail to a bright blue to feel hotter and feel more ghostly. I added ice at the top of half of the design, with someone reminding me that a lot of comets are covered or made of ice. So I also made the eyes bigger and slightly more expressive, a trend across the board now that I'm realizing is. The shiny also got a major overhaul, and it is so much better for it. Gastoroid, the Space Terror Pokemon. I went distinctly more alien and old one with this design since I wasn't happy with the original. I made the head massive, with chunks of it covered with ice or a different colored rock to break up the palette. I moved these spikes in the back from the original forward and made a floating crown over its head. I greatly simplified the tentacles, cutting down on most of the rocks that comprised them, and added a central heart/core at the middle to help keep things stable. I also made the eyes bigger so they didn't get lost in the design like they did with the original. Oh, I am so happy with this design. Firepurp, the Blazing Snake Pokemon. This changed the absolute least out of the entire line. Just better line work overall and a single black band around the neck, acting like a collar to break up the colors. That's it. Well, I did make it slightly smaller, but even then, that's kind of a stretch as far as changes. Flarepit, the Burning Eyes Pokemon. With a lot of the fire types in this reboot, I'm now realizing I removed a lot of the yellow in this design to make the color scheme not a fucking eyesore. I replace it with black for consistency across the line, and it reads easier. Again, something else I have done so much in this region, I'm just realizing, holy shit. I also added a pupil, but it's slightly faded as this Pokemon goes more and more blind with each evolution. The pupil just adds a little bit more of a friendly factor to the design and the line as a whole. Burntata, the River Lord Pokemon. I made this stage shorter off the gate since the longer body wasn't doing me any favors design-wise. I limited the orange to just the hood and the tail, alongside adding a gradient on the front of the hood where it meets the horns for a smoother transition of colors. I swapped some colors around, mainly in the face, and to keep the alternating pattern from getting too out of hand. This is still one of my better pseudo-legendaries. I really need to do more of those that aren't fairy or dragon type. Grotekuru, the Jungle Guardian Pokemon. The weakest design of the original legendary duo, this Pokemon needed major work going into the reboot. I made the upper body bigger, and I stretched out the arms as well as adding a pattern on the forearms. I also made the tips of the middle fingers red for color balancing, and just for the sheer hell of it. I thought it was fun. I gave it pants, more or less, and fiddled with the pose since the OG pose wasn't doing it for me anymore. I made the red of the original design darker and added it more across the board. This is still probably the weakest of the Guardian trio, as I'm calling these legendaries. On Fontka, the Spirit Guardian Pokemon, I shrank the legs a smidge and changed the hoof shape to make it more of a seamless shape and to make the design feel more ghosty. I added the pale blue color to the color scheme to break up the white and dark blue and make the red pop more in the face. I made the red ectoplasm sections of the body as well as the horns glow to feel more legendary and intimidating. The design really didn't need to change too much. It was already the stronger of the two, and it stayed that way. Fountain, the Eternal Guardian Pokemon. The third legendary of the region, added to the reboot, and the target of Team Glamour. This Pokemon is based on Immortal Jellyfish and the Fountain of Youth. Design is a 3-tiered fountain turned upside down, with the tentacles being the water spouts. I love the main base of the fountain being a large hat. I think that's a really fun design element combined with the color scheme and the render. I wanted it to feel slightly alien to really set it apart from the other two as the main guardian of the region. This was one of the first Pokemon I planned for the reboot, and I am so happy with how it turned out. Now I think this is a fully fleshed out legendary trio. And with that, we conclude the Amalop region reboot until the expansion down the line in a few months, if my timing mentally is correct. This was such a success in my eyes. Probably the best reboot thus far. So many of my favorite designs came out of this project, and I fixed so many of my past mistakes from the original region. As always, if you enjoyed today's video, please leave a like, it goes a long way. Click on the old subscribe button if you want to stay up to date, and down below, please, let me know what your in-game team looks like. That's always my favorite comment to get from you guys. Just seeing all of the weird and overpowered teams you will put together. Next up, we're not done revisiting old Mons, as we head off to the eastern coast of the Vanek region, to the Isle de Moreau. This is Austin, signing out.